Recognizes Ms. Stansbury from New Mexico.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to hold yet another hearing on electric vehicles, and a delight to have the second opportunity to have the exact same hearing we had a couple of weeks ago. This definitely seems to be becoming a habit of the Oversight Committee. When the majority doesn't get the answers that they want, they just have the hearing again and then beat up another witness. And I do want to just say thank you, Mr. Goffman, for being here this morning. The EPA is always a popular punching bag of our friends on the other side of the aisle, and we all know the devastating impact that the Trump administration had on the EPA, and especially the morale of all of our federal employees. So I want to thank you and all of our EPA employees who are sitting here with us today, and all of them who are serving across the country to protect our environment, because we know that you're doing the work of the American people. We know that you're doing the work that the American people elected us in this body to do, which is to protect clean air, to protect clean water, and to ensure that all of our families have a livable planet for generations to come. So, we're here today to talk about climate change, to talk about this vehicle rule, and to talk about the actions that the federal government is taking to invest in the private sector and the public sector to make sure that we address this existential and catastrophic threat to all of humanity across the planet. And, one of the reasons why I welcome the opportunity to have this hearing again is that it gives us another opportunity to highlight the important work that this Congress, last Congress, passed in passing the most significant climate legislation ever in the history of the planet, and that is the Inflation Reduction Act, and the work that the Biden administration is doing through our federal agencies to carry out the mandates that are in the Clean Air Act, that are in the Clean Water Act, and in the Inflation Reduction and bipartisan infrastructure laws to actually address our carbon emissions. And I think one of the things that folks really need to understand is that if we are going to address our carbon emissions and prevent a catastrophic climate calamity from affecting every single community on this planet, we have to do it sector by sector. We have to address it in the grid. We have to address it in domestic energy security. We have to address it through building materials. And that's exactly what the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act do. And in particular, we have to address it in the transportation sector, because transportation makes up about 29% of our emissions here in the United States. Now, there was some comments made earlier about EPA overstepping its authority in terms of setting out emission standards under the Clean Air Act. And while there was an unprecedented gutting of federal authority by a political Supreme Court a few weeks ago in Sackett and in a previous Clean Air Act decision, we all know, those of us who've worked in environmental policy, myself included, that the intent of Congress when they passed the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act was to protect American citizens, to protect our air, to protect our water, and that they intended, in a bipartisan basis, when both of those bills passed in Congress, and in the case of the Clean Water Act, were signed by a Republican president, to ensure that the American people would have a livable, breathable, drinkable, clean planet for future generations. And so it is just patently false that the EPA has overstepped their authority. Now, with respect to this current rule, this is really about addressing that slice of the pie in the transportation sector. And so, Mr. Goffman, I wonder if you could just take one moment to please explain the significance of why we have to address it in the transportation sector and how this feeds into our overall efforts to combat climate change here in the U.S.
Well, thank you very much, Congresswoman, for doing as good a job as I've ever heard anybody do in laying out the entire vision of what it will take to address not just climate change, but public health and air quality. In your question, you provided exactly the context for these rules, which are but one of several pillars on which a new car, clean car fleet of on-highway vehicles is being built. What this set of proposals will do is work in an integrated way with the investments made by the Inflation Reduction Act and in the bipartisan infrastructure law, in the whole range of innovations and deployments of technologies that will allow us to travel on road, delivering freight and transporting passengers in a way that significantly reduces pollutants like CO2. We project that these proposals, if enacted, would achieve close to, or certainly in excess of 9 billion tons of CO2 reduced, which is close to twice 2020.
Sorry, generally his time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll just say, once again, thank you. This is a critical piece in fighting climate change, and we appreciate your service.
Chair recognizes Ms. Lewis.